In the course of my lifetime, I have found myself in a variety of leadership roles, and there are many different things I've learned. Some of those things have been very hard to learn, but one thing is a constant. Leadership in any role is exhausting. Regardless of the position, if I'm a volunteer leader, if I am a director, if I'm an executive, if I'm just the guy who wound up in the leadership role because nobody else was there to do it. Leadership is tiring. It takes work to achieve that big picture, that big mission, the goals, the objectives, the daily grind. Yeah, when you're in the visioning meeting and everybody's excited about where we're gonna go, that's easy energy. It's when you're in the daily slog and grind that it's tough. If you are a leader, it presupposes that you have followers. There's no such thing as a leader with no followers. There are people who maybe have titles, but that doesn't make them a leader. People are looking to you for direction, for guidance, for mentorship. Those things make a leader, right? But leading people is also tiring. People take energy, they take work. And at least for me, in those moments when I'm a leader, I get tempted to phone it in. And we've all probably been there, right? If you find yourself in a leadership role, there are days you just don't want to take another meeting. There are days you don't really care about the big picture. You're just trying to get things done. There are days where leadership is exhausting. Here's the challenge though. For us as Christian leaders, we are modeling after something bigger than just profits or ideals. And perhaps you work in a church, you work in a faith-based organization, maybe you work in a place where there's a mission that really matters. Our example of leadership reflects on something bigger than just the title we have, but who we follow, which is Jesus. And Jesus invited us to be leaders who were like him, who were servants. This model of servant leadership is one of the most effective models that we can embrace and we can lean into. So as we go to the readings this week and every week, and as we begin the season of Advent, we're gonna find insights here from what it means to be a leader like Jesus and how we bring our faith into that, because leading that way is to lead authentically, and ultimately it's a bigger witness than we might realize. The very first reading this week is from the prophet Isaiah, and he talks about the fulfillment of a promise, that God's going to bring something to fulfillment that God has been working on. Ultimately, this is the Messiah. This is Jesus Christ. And we can have this hope here that not only did God bring that promise to fulfillment, but God brings all of his promises to fulfillment. So the prophet Isaiah is speaking to a people who are exiled, who are feeling hopeless, who are struggling, and he's saying God keeps his promises. God is faithful. St. Paul in his letter to the Thessalonians this week is encouraging them to remain vigilant and to stay rooted in a set of disciplines, beliefs, and practices that are critical to living a Christian life. And you've got to remember that as St. Paul is writing this letter, people are waiting for Jesus to return soon. There are members of the early Christian community who weren't thinking that the second coming of Christ was something that was years and years and years and decades and centuries and millennia away. They were thinking this could be something imminent. But as time goes on, they're starting to get tired and they're falling back into practices that aren't becoming of Christians, or at best are just kind of lazy. So St. Paul's challenging them to remember that we cannot grow tired in what we're called to do, to the behaviors we're called to emulate, because you never know when Jesus is returning. And then Jesus himself is speaking about how we remain faithful, how we remain diligent in our lives, and not letting the common cares of this world, letting anxiety take us off our game. Not growing tired, but remaining faithful. All of these messages this week give us a profound insight as we begin Advent, and an opportunity of how we can reassess our leadership, especially at the end of the year when we might be feeling tired, when the holidays are here, when we might be tempted to phone it in, when we might be tempted to forget that we are stewards of two things. We're stewards of the mission, and we're stewards of the people we've been entrusted. When you think about the mission to which you've been entrusted, maybe you work in an organization that's got a really big world-changing mission. Or maybe you just work in a leadership role where you're like, I'm a manager at a car lot. Like, what kind of mission do we have here? Remember that your example and your fidelity to that mission and doing the best you can in the role you've been entrusted gives witness to who you serve. If you're a leader, you've been entrusted with a mission, whether or not it's a big world-changing mission or it's just sort of a small little mission, or at least what you consider it to be, we have to be faithful to that and trust that if we're faithful to that, God continues to fulfill the promises he's given to us, just the way that he fulfilled the promises through the prophets. The second thing we're a steward of is the people that we serve. And that's where I find myself often the most tired. But I go back to St. Paul's words about how we're to behave, and recalling Jesus' words in the gospel today that I can't let the common day-to-day cares take me off the bigger picture of what I've been entrusted with here. I can't grow tired in serving people. I can't grow tired in really sound leadership practices, because ultimately I'm going to have to render an account for how well I was a steward, not only of my own gifts and talents, but the people that were trusted to me for the time that I led them. And so those are some at least examination of conscience points that I'm going to take with me into the beginning of Advent. As leaders who follow Jesus, we actually have this responsibility to emulate the Master, because if people know your faith, and if you wear a cross, or you ever tell people where you go on Sunday, who you serve, who you worship, if people see you pray, they're going to take note of more than just that part of your life. We can't compartmentalize who we are. So we look to the Master, we look to the readings, we look to Jesus every single week as Catholics and as leaders, and we put those things into practice. And Advent gives us a wonderful opportunity to think about these words, not just in terms of how they apply to our spiritual life, but how they apply to something very important that we do, which is leading other people. So as Advent begins, let's take stock in who we are and how we lead, and let us not grow tired in all of the things that we know make a great servant leader, in emulating Jesus and serving those who have been entrusted to us, and in living out the mission to the best of our ability, trusting that as we're faithful to that, God, who is always faithful in his fulfillment of promises, is going to remain faithful to us.